Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Hei Wai Tang, the director of the Asia Global Institute. The institute has been a bit quiet for the last two months because we realized that there are a lot of events going on, and obviously the Trump administration has been introducing new regulations and new policies almost every hour. So we thought we need to wait for a moment to see how we can clear up our mind to really bring in the best expert in Asia, in my opinion, to really talk about geopolitics. So I'm very happy to bring in my good friend, the Dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of the National University of Singapore, to talk about this topic, navigating the collinear economics and geopolitics of a fractured world order. So let me say a few words about Danny, Professor Quah. He's a Lee Ka-shing Professor in Economics and the Dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at NUS. His research actually crosses multiple disciplines: economics, political science, and international relations. We actually share the same PhD advisor. Both of us are proud to be the first and the last Asian students of that person, Olivier Blanchard, who used to be the chief economist of the IMF. But Danny has done a lot more than me. He started as a very successful, influential econometrician, and then moved on to economic growth, and now obviously a very unique expert on geopolitics, using economic insights and frameworks to look at both big power politics and small power models in the world that big powers are fighting. Professor Quah has been a professor at MIT, London School of Economics, and before he went to NUS around 7 to 8 years ago. In addition to that, he's also a commissioner on the Spence-Stiglitz Commission on Global Economic Transformation and serves on the World Bank President's Economic Advisory Panel. He's also an advisor for many universities in the world, such as Cambridge University, Oxford University, as well as Tsinghua in China. And he's also a frequent speaker in very influential global events on economics and politics. He just came back from Tianjin, where he spoke at the World Economic Forum there. Today's topic, as I've introduced, is really something that everyone cares about. And I decided to do it in Central instead of in Pok Fu Lam, where the Hong Kong U Main campus is, because in the past, I think discussions on geopolitics and international relations is really a hobby of a very small group of academics or people who are retired and have nothing else to do. But today, this is a huge topic of any corporate boardrooms. CEOs, CFOs, and anyone in big companies, banks, and investment banks have to incorporate what's going on, in the world due to a very aggressive U.S. president, doing things to his own country and also to other places. Big power politics is changing every day. Tariff rates can also be changing every day. I have no idea what Trump has said about the successful negotiation between the Chinese delegation and U.S. delegation in Geneva, but it seems that the gold price has dropped by 2%, which means that a lot of people became wealthier if they sell short the gold just 2 days before the announcement. Without more implications about what I think about Trump is trying to do, I think I should really let the experts, Professor Danny Quah, to speak for about half an hour. So he told me he's not going to use any PPT, which is sort of a breakthrough and innovation for this seminar series. But he convinced me just now and in the last many years that he's a great speaker without PPT, and you guys will be a lot more excited without focusing on words and equations. Without further ado, Professor Danny Quah, please.
Thank you, Hei Wai, for such a kind and generous introduction. I used to come to Hong Kong a lot more than I have been able to recently. But going forward, I hope to repair that long-run average and come here much more often. When I was at the London School of Economics previously, despite the distance, I was in Hong Kong a lot more than I am today, even though now I'm based in Singapore. Hei Wai and I have been trying to arrange for an event like this for a long time, and I'm very pleased that I've finally been able to get to do this. As Hei Wai said, the it is extremely risky and dangerous to be talking about geopolitics today. I mean, dangerous in multiple ways. You know, you don't want to go into the United States with dangerous things on your smartphone because that might be detected. But also dangerous in the sense that in terms of our intellectual standing, we can carry out the analysis a certain way, and then next thing you know, Trump and his administration have turned it around 180 degrees, and what you've said becomes totally irrelevant. What I want to do is I hope that at the end of the next 30 minutes, I want to be able to give you some ideas that you will be able to hang on to. That no matter what Trump does, no matter how the twists and turns go, they will remain useful. And for me, they describe the long-run trends of where the international system is going. Trump is a big disruptor of the international system. But he is not the primary cause of these dynamics. He is not ultimately causal for what's happening in the world. Today, the world is disrupted. But I want to convince you also, at the end of the next 30 minutes and then in the conversation, that current disruption is also not entirely unexpected, given how the international system had already been evolving over the past several decades. David Brooks, the New York Times columnist, wrote 8 years ago. He said of Donald Trump and how the whole world has been trying to analyze what Trump 1.0 was going to do. He said it is tragic that the entire world's analytic ability is focused on someone whose thought patterns are like 6 fireflies in a jam jar. They're just totally random. There's no point trying to dig deeper. But I want to argue to you that there are indeed long-run trends, and understanding those long-run trends matter. So it's not just that, you know, just thinking about the disruptions that come to mind, Liberation Day tariffs, Canada is America's 51st state, America taking over Greenland, turning down NATO, asking NATO to completely rewire itself, bombing Iran in just the last few days. All of these are significant disruptions, but I don't want us to get distracted from what the underlying challenges are. So in thinking about the underlying challenges, I want to make 3 points. The first of these is that the traditional way that many of us, economists, but not just economists, think about the international system, the traditional way is that geopolitics is the dustbin of bad economics. That if the world only understood how economics is supposed to operate, the world would be a lot better off. And that things disrupt the world, they're geopolitics. Our understanding of the world is going along fine, but every now and then we have to add in a shock, that's geopolitics. Geopolitics is the dustbin of bad economics. My first point is to tell you why people think that. Give you a way in which that statement makes sense. My second point is to overturn that idea. To say to you that actually, no, geopolitics is not the dustbin of bad economics, that today, economics is aligned with geopolitics. And that the reason geopolitics has become so important is that economics is also going in the same direction, is pointing in the same direction that the message of geopolitics is giving us. So it is not that geopolitics is bad economics, it is that today economics and geopolitics are collinear. They're moving in the same direction. They're aligned. And in fact, I want to argue that they've been aligned for the last century. That actually, all along we've been thinking that geopolitics is this disruptive factor. Economics is operating and making the world better. For the last century, economics and geopolitics have been aligned. If you accept these two propositions that I'm going to give you, why we thought one way, and then the empirical reality that is the opposite of that, that will also help carry us into the message and conclusions I want you to take forwards. Whether you're an investment banker, an academic, someone who's concerned about your financial portfolio, someone who's concerned about the future of Hong Kong or the future of Asia, I think I want to argue that these two sort of models that I'm going to set up help us carry forwards. But then I want to end with things that we can do. We are not America. I live in Singapore now, and I, together with 80% of the world's population, lives in neither America nor China. For us, US-China geopolitical rivalry is extremely consequential, and if we're not careful, we will simply be collateral damage. We will be passive bystanders. I want to argue that third nations like mine, who are not frontline US-China, can still play a role in this model of how economics and geopolitics are evolving. So I need to get you to that. Let me take these in turn. Let me provide a little bit more detail. Why is geopolitics the dustbin of bad economics? Why do people think this? Okay, here's the state of the world that we see now disrupted. World order is the way in which the international system operates. World order is a system of norms, conventions, and understanding between individual nations in the world. And for the last 70 years, ever since the end of the Second World War, world order has been driven by a vision of peace and prosperity. So this was a vision that the entire world was a community of nations, that what drives the world, what drives international policy making, is that there's a one world vision of nation states that trade with one another. There's a multilateral system of laws under which that trade and interaction occurs. Those are the norms and conventions. That's made for an orderly international community, and that orderly international community is based on a set of rules, international law, that are in turn driven by the consent of the governed, sustained by the organized opinion of humanity. This is Woodrow Wilson's vision. Woodrow Wilson might have been a terrible person in being racist, in having slaves. His name is now taken away from Princeton University's institutions, but he had a wonderful vision for how the world was supposed to operate. And for us now, when we think geopolitics has disrupted the world, we say that was the world we want to get back to. It was a multilateral, rules-based order with globalization that allowed small economies like yours and mine to thrive and prosper. The multilateral, rules-based order. And we decry how geopolitics, this awful thing, has disrupted this world. Multilateralism allowed us to prosper because multilateralism was a rules-based order that gave rise to a level playing field. It was paired with a commitment to peaceful dispute resolution based on consultation, not on might makes right. And it came with the idea that nation states had a default mode of interaction, which was cooperation. Under the multilateral rules-based order, the entire international community could advance with globalization, and the world could take on global challenges, whether it was global climate crisis, the pandemic, robots and AI regulation, an extraterrestrial invasion from another planet. We would be okay because we had the multilateral rules-based order that allowed us to cooperate. And for us, when we say geopolitics has disrupted that world, we point to US-China rivalry. And we say, well, not really. I mean, there are different reasons why that's happening, but that is breaking down the multilateral rules-based order from all sides. What saved the world, whether keeping it going as a multilateral rules-based order, or more recently, what's been argued by IMF and others, will save the world, even with geopolitics behaving so badly, is that if the world decouples, the global economy decouples, costs will be too high. This view is that economics will save a world wrecked by geopolitical rivalry, because everybody will realize that the economic costs of decoupling are too high. And this is a view that's not revolutionary, it's conventional wisdom. Joe Nye, the great international relations scholar who developed the idea of soft power, described this view about economics holding the world together despite geopolitical rivalry between China and the United States in column after column in Project Syndicate in the New York Times. Kristalina Georgieva, the managing director of the IMF, wrote a paper in Foreign Affairs saying that her teams of research economists have estimated that the cost of a US-China decoupling will be 7% of global GDP, more than the combined output of France and Germany. If the world is not prepared, and the world is sensible, if the world is not prepared to lose that amount of wealth, the world will hold together. And that geopolitical rivalry, this dustbin of bad ideas, will realize its errors, come to its senses, and we will be able to go back to the multilateral rules-based order, close enough. I say this is also the IMF view because Gita Gopinath also describes in her many writings a vision of the world like this. IMF is now involved in calibrating and quantifying what would happen if the world does move on towards decoupling, and every iteration says it is too expensive, the world needs to come to its senses. So that is what I've just described to you, the world of multilateral rules-based order as the norm, because that's what we've known for the last century. And then the disruption today, because of US-China rivalry, for reasons that we don't really get into, threatens this multilateral rules-based order. It throws up variable tariffs at every second change. It throws up tariffs against all of America's enemies, China especially, but even Singapore. Well, we're innocent bystanders. We consider ourselves very good friends with America. We've been hit with tariffs. We run a trade deficit against the United States, so America should feel that we're already on its side. America is winning against Singapore. We buy a lot of F-35s from America. America should feel that we're good friends. Nonetheless, it's tariffed us. These disruptive actions include tariffs on my good friends in Heard Island and McDonald Islands, which many of you might know is populated by 2,000 penguins. No economists. Trump has also taken out tariffs against Heard Island and McDonald Islands. This is a full court press against the multilateral rules-based order. How awful geopolitics is, that it's hijacked the economic narrative that we had, which was building an ever stronger multilateral rules-based order. Indeed, geopolitics is the dustbin of bad economics. Well, now, that was my first point, and I want to argue that that vision is not quite right. I want to tell you that that is one interpretation of the world, but it's not going to be my interpretation, and it doesn't quite fit the facts. In other words, economics and geopolitics are actually collinear, not opposed to each other. Okay, so I want to take a few minutes to say why, to give you a little bit of evidence why this is. Why do I believe this? In papers elsewhere, I've written about how you can think about the world, the recent history, the 20th century history of the world until today, has been divided into two periods. There's a first period, the early part, right after the Second World War, which was a centripetal period. A period when the world was being brought closer together, when coalescence was the order of the day. From you and me, from what I've said about economics being a glue, economics was operating there. But I want to argue that that period, right after the Second World War, was a period when geopolitics was also coalescing. Geopolitics was trying to bring the world together. So in that early period, economics and geopolitics were indeed collinear, but in a way that brought the world ever closer together. And then I want to argue that there was a disruption that occurred right around the Obama administration, when thinking began to change and the world then began to push in the other direction, when forces became centrifugal. That's when we think the geopolitical shock occurred. But I want to point out that that's also when the economic shock occurred. And economics, just as geopolitics turned around 180 degrees, so did economics. and economics and geopolitics remained collinear, but this time they were making the world fragment. So what's the story here? Well, after the Second World War, America was the great cheerleader for globalization. It was the great architect for the multilateral rules-based order. It did that for geopolitical reasons. America built the international system because it was in Cold War contention with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had an economic philosophy that ran against the idea of open markets and free trade. America, conveniently, took the opposite position. So from President Eisenhower on, through John F. Kennedy, Richard Nixon, Bill Clinton, all the US administrations were unified on the idea that America needed to build a world of open markets and free trade that was coalescent. And economics fell in with that idea because economics and the mantra of that era, of this coalescent era, the early part of this period, the part right after the Second World War, economics and geopolitics were driven by three ideas. First, economic efficiency. That is the goal. Everything that you organize, whether in a global supply chain or production at home, is driven by the idea of economic efficiency. The second great idea was that of comparative advantage. No matter whether you were small or large, advanced, rich, or poor, developing, participating in the global economy was a win-win proposition. So the two ideas, economics-based, economic efficiency, and comparative advantage, drove the world towards globalization. But geopolitics was also moving in the same direction. Not only were all the US administrations countering the anti-market rhetoric of the Soviet Union and its communist system, within academia emerged the idea of political convergence. Political convergence was developed by political scientists and sociologists that said that as economies develop and they grow richer, no matter their initial state, everybody converges towards democracy. Democracy is the endpoint of political evolution. And if that's the case, and if America is in the driving seat, it became doubly advantageous to want the world to develop through open markets and free trade. Economic efficiency, comparative advantage, political convergence drove the world of coalescence. In this time, President Eisenhower drove America into what became the WTO because he said failure on the part of America to join this organization would be a great disappointment throughout the free world when the Soviet Union is stepping up its foreign economic efforts, completely different economic efforts. John F. Kennedy said that a vital expanding economy in the free world is the strongest antidote to the threat of the world communist movement. Everybody was aligned early on, and that continued. Richard Nixon, who, as we know, opened relations between America and China at a time when China was still viewed as a dangerous nation, having killed millions of its own people in the Cultural Revolution, still actively exporting socialist revolution. Nixon went to China and said, this planet is too small for 1 billion of its potentially most able people to continue to live in angry isolation. There, to nurture their fantasies, cherish their hates, threaten their neighbors. This was a time when in Southeast Asia, we were receiving communist Chinese broadcasts from Kunming advocating violent communist revolution. But Nixon and American presidents, American administrations brought China into the world, into the WTO. Bill Clinton, remember, made a famous speech, actually, at Johns Hopkins University. where he said China needs to be in WTO. He said there are many in America who are against this idea because you say China is a growing threat to its neighbors. We shouldn't allow its entry into the WTO because that will strengthen it. China violates labor rights and human rights. We shouldn't reward it. China is a dangerous proliferator of weapons. We shouldn't empower it. But Clinton said, the question is not whether we approve or disapprove of what happens in China. The question is, what's the smartest thing for America to do? And the smartest thing for America to do was to welcome China into the international trading system. Economic efficiency, comparative advantage, political convergence would change everything. Clinton said that we know how much the internet has changed America, and we were already an open society. Imagine how much the internet will change China. China might try and control the internet, but that's like trying to nail Jell-O to the wall. America will succeed. So that was the view. That was the view going into this period. Then what happened? Well, China grew strong. China showed no tendency in the direction of political convergence. China began to rearm, developed weapons like FOBs, the Fractional Orbital Bombardment System, for which America still has no counter, and America's views towards China turned around. Today, the state of the world is such that these long-run trends have made for a tenuous rivalry between America and China. These long-run trends that partly the frustration in the United States, partly China's belief that it will continue to go its own way, have brought about this dangerous rivalry. And today, the geopolitics has switched around. But shouldn't the economics remain the same? Shouldn't economics, just like Joe Nye and Kristalina Georgieva argued, should continue to keep America from decoupling? So that ends my second point. So I want to go to do my third point now, which is how we need to navigate this world, which is now standing poised on a fragmented international economy. Will economics save us? And I will argue no, because the idea of comparative advantage continues to hold. Haywire and I, as practicing economists, would have our licenses taken away if we said otherwise. Comparative advantage continues to hold. But that is not how the world today sees international trade. The world today sees international trade in terms of something called the China shock. And the China shock is the idea that when you trade with a sufficiently large partner whose market power is such that it ends up changing the way your economy operates, you need to rethink what comparative advantage does. China's trade with America benefits America. It has made available to America high quality, cheap goods. America's standard of living would be much worse on average if it weren't trading with China. This is the Kristalina Georgieva point. But that is not how ordinary Americans see this. Ordinary Americans look out and they see China stealing their jobs through competition. They see China being so ultra competitive that China is hollowing out their industry. They see this onslaught of imports into America turning into ghost towns what were once thriving middle-class American communities. And you don't need to look very far in American culture to see narrative of this kind. You see this in J.D. Vance's biography. You see this in documentary after documentary of the Midwest. You see this in The Failure when Amazon tried to document it, how a Chinese glass-making factory attempted to be set up in China. America sees trade not in terms of the overall win-win outcomes, it sees it distributionally. And the ones who are at the bottom of the economic distribution, income distribution distributionally, are also now politically pivotal. They're the ones who are driving the Trump narrative. Trump in this view, is only a symptom. He is a firefly. He's being bounced around by these deeper political issues. The China shock is an important part of how economics has also turned around and again become collinear with geopolitics. Just as American and China geopolitics became fractured, became more antagonistic, so did the economics. That turnaround in economics does not have to affect the rest of us. Singapore and many, many other nations around the world still believe in comparative advantage. We still believe in the benefits of free trade. But this disruption of the international system is something that we do have to navigate. So let me end with how we might do this. Okay. If I were to summarize into a very compact form, a number of things that I've said, the US-China rivalry is real. It's driven by both geopolitics and economics. The geopolitical angle is driven by a frustration with the lack of political convergence. That takes us right back to John F. Kennedy in the 1960s. John F. Kennedy said that the great twilight struggle of humanity is the struggle between democracy and freedom and totalitarianism and tyranny. And there are Americans who still think of America and China in that way. There's another part of American-China political rivalry that I haven't quite brought out, but that's associated with the writings of scholars such as John Mearsheimer and Elbridge Colby. And for them, that China is not a democracy doesn't matter. The fact that China is rising the way it does, that's the problem. So Elbridge Colby said that the US needs to prevent a hostile hegemonic power gaining ascendancy over the Asia-Pacific region. If this were to happen, this would severely constrain US freedom of actions and America's future prospects. And Colby makes it very clear. He said, this is an alternative hegemony outside the United States by a different nation state. And as far as Colby is concerned, hegemony by any state of whatever political complexion is a grave concern. China's achievement would pose a serious challenge to American interests under any circumstances, whether or not China was governed by the Chinese Communist Party. This is an order of magnitude beyond the Kennedy rhetoric. This is no longer about the Great Twilight Struggle. This is about great powers contending for hegemony. And it will be present whether this alternative hegemon is China, ruled by the Chinese Communist Party, or is Japan a liberal democracy, or is India a new democracy. America doesn't care. It will not tolerate a second power. John Mearsheimer said it very clearly. He said most Americans do not recognize that today Beijing and Washington are following the same playbook. They believe that America is a noble democracy, different from authoritarian and ruthless countries like China. Mearsheimer says that is not how international politics works. Geopolitics is concerned only about a zero-sum game, which is a competition for leadership and hegemony in the world. No matter how China changes, even if China had converged, according to political convergence theories, this would still be a problem. And of course, there's the China shock. What do we do? So let me end in just 2 minutes, if I may, Hewai, by suggesting some ideas that I'm happy to elaborate on in conversation, whether in the group afterwards in Q&A or however you like. I live in a third nation. I've just described to you the dynamics of US and China geopolitical rivalry and its economic relations. And I've described to you rather pessimistically the inevitability of this. It's not that economics is holding back geopolitics from making mistakes. Economics is right there alongside geopolitics, cheering it on. And all the geopolitics narratives are very dismal ones. Some of it has to do with China not being a democracy. Some of it doesn't care that China is not a democracy. It just cares that this is a rival to America. So what do we do? Third nations like mine are small nations. every nation in the world is a small nation compared to America and China. The last thing that we would want to do in thinking about or disrupting this horrible trend is to get in between these two giants. No nation that's sensible, has a sense of self-preservation, wants to stand across the battlefield from a great power who has nuclear weapons. That's not our job. It's not what we want to do. So we have to be a little bit more clever about this. So let me end with 3 suggestions that small nations like mine, I'm trying to bring about change. The first is the idea of inadvertent cooperation. There was a time under the multilateral rules-based order where the default mode of behavior was cooperation. Today, there's US-China rivalry, there's rivalries everywhere. And the fact that there's this fracturing of the fabric of the multilateral rules-based system means every nation thinks it's now out for itself. The world is not likely in the next 5 years to see an outbreak of mutual love for one another. The world nations just don't behave that way anymore. However, and so you might think they're not minded to cooperate. Our battle against the global climate challenge is now lost. I say we look for ways in which we get inadvertent cooperation, where nations end up doing the right thing, even if it's for the wrong reason. Economics is about inadvertent cooperation. You say let companies compete. They're looking out for only themselves, they're mean towards each other, and they end up producing products that are good for consumers. Third nations are consumers. Let the great powers duke it out, but look for ways for inadvertent cooperation. One example might be to say that if these great nations want to contend with each other for EV production, go ahead and do so. But do so by subsidizing EV production in each of your nations. If you think the other guy is unfair, you play unfair. But by doing this, you actually end up producing more EVs for the world to get to consume and use. And the world badly needs more clean sources of new energy. The second proposition is nudge the great powers away from gridlock. In situations like this, game theorists describe it as a prisoner's dilemma situation, where both nations are caught in gridlock, neither one can pull away without the other side taking advantage of them. In those situations, nudges of the kind that we study in behavioral economics can move the equilibrium away from gridlock. Small nations, third nations can help nudge away from gridlock. And then finally, build models of pathfinder multilateralism. Smaller models of multilateralism where you don't have to include everyone. If America feels it doesn't want to join the dispute resolution mechanism of the World Trade Organization, that's fine. Unlike the WTO, we don't insist that all 166 countries have to be unanimous. Build small systems that are multilateral in principle, but then are open and inclusive that allow others to come in. A lot of my research now is trying to work through how these 3 propositions can in fact still be helpful managing this world that's a fractured world order where even the economics and geopolitics are already aligned against making it better. Third nations need to step up and take action. Thank you all for your attention. I look forward to the